More football talk now with the professor, NFL Insider John Clayton. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at John Clayton NFL. His latest article over at the Washington Post, 6 players who will be most impactful down the stretch for the NFL season. We'll get into all of that and more right now with John Clayton as he joins us all guests do on the Boardwalk kind of hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. John, how you doing this Thursday?
Good. How are you?
Good. So before we get to your article on the Washington Post, we wanted to get your perspective on the Eagles because unexpected win, Jalen Hurts, pretty impressive game. What were some of your takeaways, initially from the Eagles game, what we saw from Jalen Hurts?
Well, I think what it came down to is that, here's Jalen Hurts kind of using the Taysom Hill type of role and did it better than Taysom Hill. And Taysom Hill, of course, has had 3 starts before this game, at least this year, and now looks to be, a little bit in trouble if they have to go against good teams. And one thing we know, the Eagles do have a good defense. That's something that's been holding up all year. But offensively, basically, it turned into a copy of Lamar Jackson and what he does down in Baltimore. I mean, because when you think about the idea that, Hurts can go out there, run the football, get the running game going, and that was good. And, you look at the fact that New Orleans had a streak of 55, I believe, consecutive games where they didn't give up a 100-yard rusher. Well, guess what? And Hurst ended up getting over 100 yards. Miles Sanders got over 100 yards. I mean, really shattered them. And so what you wonder about, can this be a repeat to a certain degree? Because obviously there's not enough games to do it. So you go back to 2018, John Harbaugh, kind of like Doug Peterson, was in trouble. He's on a hot seat. And so he made the switch to go to Lamar Jackson. They go to the running offense. They win 7 out of 8 games to make the playoffs. And then eventually he gets a well-deserved contract extension. And so now in the case of Doug Peterson, if they can take a run and get a run going with that good defense, maybe there's a chance. I know it's going to be tough because they have to make up so much ground in such a short period of time, game and a half over 3 games to catch Washington. But, hey, I mean, if you finish the season, with a couple more wins, even though the schedule is pretty tough, I still think that would be boding well for this team.
I don't want to take anything away from the victory because it was very impressive, but how much do you think played a role when the Saints were on their 3rd straight road game with Kansas City going to New Orleans next, while you had the Eagles with such an emotional change at quarterback? It just set up, it seemed, for a trap game, if you will.
Yeah, you could say that because the Saints, because again, they've been playing so well. I mean, they cleared out all their early season problems with their defense, and then all of a sudden now had the number 1 defense in football. But I think what it does show is that the Eagles, for talent, certainly is better than their record, because one thing you can see that Taysom Hill was going through an easy stretch. I mean, he was taking on teams like Denver and that aren't very good, the losing teams. And, of course, I can't imagine that Sean Payton would allow the team to, kind of look past the team, but maybe that played into it for a certain degree. Again, now what it comes down to see if the Eagles and Hurst can continue this. But, yeah, I think, going 3 games is very difficult when you're on the road, although, again, it's not as difficult this year because home teams are 104, 103, and 1 right now. So it's a pretty 50-50. Whether it's win or lose at home or on the road. But still, I think it was a good victory for Doug Peterson, and certainly makes it interesting at the quarterback position.
So what's the next step for the Eagles this Sunday with the Cardinals? A very, very different defense personnel-wise than what the Eagles saw with the Saints.
Well, for talent, I mean, the defense right now that's very good stopping the run. And it got a little bit worse because Jordan Phillips, who got a $10 million a year contract to come over from Buffalo, the defensive lineman, he just got back from injured reserve, and he ends up coming back and, losing, a hamstring injury, so he's not going to be able to play. So I guess from one standpoint, because one thing that particularly with Hassan Reddick getting the 5 sacks and all that, they can rush the quarterback, and they're a big blitzing team. But one thing that they like to do is they like to play man. And that's why there's such a dramatic difference between Carson Wentz and Hurst in the standpoint, if they're going to go man defense, then his running ability is even going to take advantage of it a little bit more. But basically what you're going to be seeing is kind of an upgraded version from what you saw last week, because Kyler Murray, after about a 3-game stretch with a shoulder injury, he wasn't running as much. Well, he got back to running. And so this is going to be interesting to see because this will be a running type of game for both teams.
I'm not trying to look at this negatively, although I'm kind of throwing another element of, maybe looking at it that way. Is it possible that with Jalen Hurts, the element of surprise was so big, you didn't really have tape? And I just wonder, because Doug is known to run the same offense and to be very vanilla, be very bland. Should that be a concern with him calling the game for Jalen Hurts? Because now there is tape. It's only one game, but the more games you play, there will only be more tape on him.
Yeah, that could be a factor, but also, too, it's like, if you have good ability to run the football, now what you'll also wonder about is there going to be enough blockers out there that can do anything? Because now, one more guy going on injured reserve, the right tackle. So the blocking has to be a big concern. Jason Peters last week, but he was pretty much down most of the season. But that can be a challenge. But yeah, but the question is going to be, will the blitzing cause problems? Because the Saints aren't a big blitzing team, and naturally Vance Joseph, who's a defensive coordinator in Arizona, is a big blitzer. How much problem is that going to cause? And if there's going to be pressure, is that going to cause problem for Jalen Hurts? But I think you just take it one step at a time. It was a great start for him. He brought energy back in the offense, energy back in the team. And again, the one thing that is still standing in the Eagles' quarter is that defense is pretty good.
John Clayton joining us here on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure to follow on Twitter at John Clayton NFL. Also, got his latest article over at the Washington Post. As the NFL playoff stretch begins, these 6 players are the biggest impact. And one of those players you have on that list is Jalen Hurts. You mentioned in the article, John, that he's a wild card. So what if Jalen Hurts does keep up this play? How much can he upset the entire playoff outlay?
Well, I don't know, because, again, it's like they still go in as a 4th seed, whoever wins this division, and they're going to be facing the 5th seed, which very well is going to be a team from the NFC West. So the question is, I guess you have to kind of reenact which team, whether it's going to be Seattle or Philadelphia, they can face. And Seattle's defense is getting a little bit better. They're starting to sort some things out on offense, although I don't know how you judge what's going to be there with a 40-3 victory over a bad Jets team. And then, of course, the Rams, they've got one of the best defenses in football, even though they don't have a lot of big names other than Aaron Donald and Jalen Hurts. And they've got an offense that's, acceptable. But I guess you have to just look back and say, okay, which team, whether it's Washington, Philadelphia, or the New York Giants, could do the best against either the Rams or the Seahawks?
Looking at another name on the list, you have Big Ben, and I think that's so interesting with this Steelers team. They start out 11-0, and then they lose 2 straight. It seems like the sky is falling. How big is Big Ben for the rest of the way?
Huge. Because, I put Russell Wilson in the number 1 slot, mainly because, again, if he plays well, they win. If he doesn't play well and makes turnovers, they lose. And so that's the key right there. But what you're looking at with the Steelers right now, there's a lot of things that just aren't going right. They're one of the worst running football teams in the country. Their defense was at least down 3 linebackers because they lost 2 to ACL injuries. And then also had Vince Williams on the COVID list. And so they were down 3/4 of their linebackers. The only starter they had left was TJ Watt. And so that was a problem. Then you look at the fact that Ben Roethlisberger is going through a stretch where he's had 4 consecutive games where his passing yards per pass was 5.7 or less, and it was so bad last week that it was down to 3.7 yards per attempt, which is just ridiculously low. You need to be above 6.4 just to be average, and he's at 3.7. Now, what's hurt them also is that they're the 2nd worst team in football for dropping passes. The Cowboys have 29, the Steelers have 25, and so they've just got to find a way. And, of course, it doesn't make it any easier that they have 2 games coming up the rest of the season against winning teams. Indianapolis is going to be a tough one. They've got to play Cleveland, and so they've got to get out of it. But, again, Ben Roethlisberger has a long history of bouncing back from adversity, but he needs to do it, and he needs to do it this week.
They mentioned on the Sunday Night Football broadcast, John, about how the Bills were predicting some of the things the Steelers were doing because of the style that Ben Roethlisberger likes to play. If teams are knowing what's coming, is there anything the Steelers can do to maybe mask that or maybe adjust on the fly, or is it too late in the season?
They can make adjustments. You heard the same thing even coming out of the mouth of Baltimore quarterback Lamar Jackson, that he was sensing that people were being able to predict some of the plays that are there. But you notice that now in the last couple of weeks, they've gotten back to getting that running game going and getting the offense moving in the right direction. And so, so I'd have to think they've got to vary some things up. And, one thing that when you start to hear these type of comments, coaches then kind of go in and spend extra hours. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the offensive coordinator stayed overnight if that's going to be the case. But, they've got to fix some things up. But one thing that's maybe predictable about what's going on is that, Ben Roethlisberger's taken a lot out of his air yards because, instead of throwing deep, he's been throwing quicker, shorter passes. And so because of that, I think that, they caught up to him in the sense of maybe in the last couple of weeks, if you figure we don't have to worry about the deeper stuff, so let's take away the underneath stuff because that's what Ben's working on because he's getting the ball out in about 2.25 seconds, which he's never been able to get the ball out that quickly. So maybe they just need to lengthen some things and also get better blocking on the offensive line.
John, another thing in your Around the NFL part of your Washington Post piece I want to ask you about. You mentioned at the end about how there's a possibility this might be the end for Matthew Stafford, and it's very strange to think about a Detroit Lions team. I mean, he has been the most stable quarterback of the last 30, 40 years for that franchise. And if they do move on from him, where does he go? What do they do? I mean, it just seems like such a strange thing to even wrap your head around.
Yeah, but of course that's the thing because there's going to be so many different changes on teams, particularly with the cap going down and not going up. And so now you have to start to think, okay, is it time to make a move? And right now, with that rib injury, don't know when he's going to be back. And almost for his sake, it almost be a good idea to go to a different team. Because, again, here's a great player that's played for a long period of time, since 2009. They were able to get him because of a winless season. And what they now have done is they put him in a position where he's made the playoffs a little bit, like 3 or 4 times, but they can't win a playoff game because there's not enough good talent around him. And, of course, you wonder where the talent level is going to be, because Marvin Jones, the wide receiver, he's a free agent after the year. Their offensive line's not very good. So, I think there's going to be a lot of churning on these teams right now that are going to have 10 losses or more, and that churning could make Matthew Stafford available, at least in some kind of a trade.
Do you have a destination potentially in mind that Stafford would make a lot of sense for?
You kind of wonder if now, again, New Orleans, Sean Payton put a little bit of a ribbon on where things are going to go. He thinks if the quarterback on this team is still on his team, whether it's going to be Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill, which kind of gives the indication that Drew Brees might be out. So I think, still you can't rule out the possibility of maybe the Saints getting involved. I mean, Indianapolis, I still think they're going to bring Phillip Rivers back, but if they don't, then I think they're going to be making calls for Sam Darnold. They'll be making calls on Carson Wentz if he's going to be available, and then they could look at Stafford as a possibility too. But there's going to be a lot more movement, and again, San Francisco could be one too because there seems to be churning out in the Bay Area that they might move on from Jimmy Garoppolo.
He's John Clayton. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at John Clayton NFL. Check out his latest article in the Washington Post and also the Schooled with the Professor podcast. As all guests, he appeared on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. John, always appreciate the time and the insights.
Thank you.